All right, hey everybody. So yeah, I picked kind of a crappy name for a title, huh? Like, what the hell is that, right? So I'm glad you guys showed up anyways, because I have some really cool stuff I want to show you, and some stuff I've been working on, stuff I've learned, and kind of I really want to dig into what that term passive user testing means, and I'm gonna dig into that. Oh, it's on. No microphone. How does this thing work? Oh, there it is, on. Perfect. Whoa, that's way better this time. Okay, so I don't have to yell. So I'm going to be discussing, what passive user testing is, how you can use it in your organization, and actually what you're going to be able to learn about your customer so that you can improve your conversion rates, whether that be, just even clicks, sales, leads, etc. So how many people in here are actually doing user testing right now at all? Okay, loud and proud. Like high and proud? I think that's for Colorado. Anyway, so there's 3 people in here doing that, and then if you don't mind, if I just ask, what do you consider user testing? What are you doing that you're calling user testing at the moment? I saw 1, 2, and 3 in the back. If you could just kind of yell out something that you do that you consider user testing. Okay. Okay, so what she said is they do peak videos using usertesting.com, and then they'll do full user testing scenarios. I'll talk about that in a little bit, what that means, because it's just, I'm using a definition, like the name of something to define something, which gets a little murky. How about you? Okay, so she's running A/B tests. A/B tests are, I wouldn't say that they're part of the user testing camp. It is definitely, you use user tests to come up with ideas for A/B tests. A/B testing is a way to verify or validate a hypothesis, okay? And this stuff, if you get really, really good at user tests, be it active or passive, what you're gonna be able to do is actually get around some of the A/B testing that you need to do, because you're gonna find something that might be, a foundational issue or an accessibility issue, because you'll see frustration on the user side, okay? And there was one more person that said something about user testing, but if you wanna be shy, that's cool. I think I kind of made my point. So when I say user testing, a lot of people think of, kind of getting people in a room, asking them to complete an action. I've done that type of testing before. Those neuro labs that people will do, where they strap it up and kind of go through and look at, how people are actually interacting with the site. There was this cool technology, and I really, really wanted them to be good, really, really did, and they kind of screwed the pooch. But it was a company called Sticky.ad, and they use your webcams actually as this kind of creepy, a Clockwork Orange type thing, digging through and seeing how you're actually gazing the website. So that's actually getting kind of physical responses, because there isn't a pure correlation between mouse movement and eye tracking. And eye tracking will be physiological, where you can't kind of help but do something. That's where color theory and things like that come into play when you're creating websites. And then, testing itself, like, hey, what did you do? What's this? That's not even what this is. But that's just half of it. All of those examples I just talked about, or what you had explained, that is what I call active user testing, okay? And there's 2 types of user testing out there. There's active, and then the name of this presentation, passive. So first, let me dig into a little bit of examples of what active testing is and what you can learn from it, and actually where you can actually kind of miss some opportunities. Okay, so active user tests, they're a user test where the user is unaware they're in a testing environment. I mean, they are aware they are in a testing environment. They know it, okay? You're saying, act this way, do this, right? And a type of active user test would be a survey. You're asking them to read a question, fill in a response. And it's going to tell you what your customer's thinking, right? So there's some pros to using surveys on a website, right? You get quick, detailed responses from actual web visitors. It's not just your idea, because the second you start thinking, oh, I think this is the case, you're most likely wrong, because you're not your customer, you're not your visitor. You are so close to something that you cannot come from any sort of kind of valid standpoint when you're interacting with your brand or your site. So you get quick, detailed responses. It's really easy to segment data and find trends. And then you kind of know exactly what your customers are thinking. So here's a few ways that you can use surveys to really kind of improve things. Who has a sales team here? Does anybody have a sales team? I bet they want to know a lot about customers, right? Like, they want some pretty detailed information. Yeah, but then on your marketing side, you want more conversions, so you don't want to ask them for all that stuff sometimes. You have the big quantity over quality debate, but then you can use micro surveys or micro polls post-conversion to try to get more information for your sales team while still having the baseline, right? So let's say someone fills out a form and your sales team and your marketing team are just yelling at each other, and they're like, we need this field, but you're like, it is killing conversion rates, initial conversion rates. Do you know when's the best time to ask somebody to take any type of action? Right after they converted. So if you show some type of micro survey that pops up that goes, hey, by the way, can you tell us a little bit about ask that question. And then you're more likely going to get a higher response rate while having a way to follow up with people later on. And there's a lot of technologies out there that can do that for you, and I'll talk a little bit about those today. I'm trying to go technology agnostic today to talk more about practices and those types of things. Other things you can do? Yeah, what's up?
So that was, I think that's the next idea. Can I just explain my...
Oh, please do. Yeah.
So I'm in the recruiting business.
Uh-huh.
So we find people jobs. The most important thing I want to know from the emails that I send out, are you interested and what is the best time and number I can reach you at? I don't want to inundate them with anything more than that.
Yep.
But you're saying, that's fine, keep it simple like that. But the moment they do that, then say, by the way, what's your budget? I'll put their time put and all these types of questions. They don't answer, fine, but at least you got the initial attempt. Because that's what our salespeople do.
Yeah, exactly. So what he was saying there was pretty much, it was an applied synopsis of what I was just talking about, where, hey, if you know you're kind of hitting a speed bump there in terms of conversions because you're asking for too much stuff, go bare minimum, ask on the next page for more stuff. People will fill that out. For example, if you go to DigitalMarketer.com or you go to another one of our properties, TrueConversion.com, you'll see we go by invitation only, and we ask them for just their email address on step 1. Step 2, we ask them for everything else. 72% of the people that reach step 2 fill it out in its entirety. Okay? So that's a power of how you can break up forms, but you can also use that with other types of surveys as well if you're trying to gather more user data, right? Another thing you can use with these things are simply, if you're running a membership site, ways to get more information. Here's one example that we did at Digital Marketer. We have, for our paid lab members, we have a Facebook group. And we know if people jump into the Facebook group, they will stick around longer. Our churn rate cuts down. But what we wanted to figure out was, how many people are in that group as opposed to the people that have signed up. And then also look at their buying habits. So we needed to push data into our CRM. We just threw a small survey up that connected through Infusionsoft's API and asked them a simple question. Are you a member of Digital Marketer Engage, which is our Facebook group? Yes or no? If yes, ask them what their email address is. All that gets pushed in, they get a tag applied, and then we can start quantifying what that community actually is for us. So there's a lot of things you can do from the active side that will help you out, right? But there are some things that, might not be so great. It's only a subset of your audience. People who, think of the stereotypical person that takes surveys. It is just a slice of the pie, right? I've always likened them to the type of person, remember in elementary school on a Friday when your teacher would say to you, oh, I'll see you tomorrow, and you had that one kid that'd be like, tomorrow's Saturday. I look at that one kid as the type of person, that's just a percentage of the class that's gonna say something that dumb. Not to say that people who take surveys are dumb, but it's just, no, they're not. They're very valuable, but only valuable to a point because they're not an exact kind of depiction of your audience, right? There can be inaccuracies due to questions, question construction, and there's lots and lots of external variables. They start the survey, they leave. They get a phone call. Maybe one of the questions they don't know the answer to, because maybe you're asking about revenue structure and they just don't know. Maybe they're a junior employee, not quite at the upper level. Okay, so things like that. And here's some of the tech I use for forms. FormStack is awesome. I've been a long-time user for them. SurveyMonkey's good. Wufoo we've been using more regularly, mainly because that was what I was brought into when I went to Digital Marketer. I'd rather switch over to FormStack, but we have too many forms now. Okay, so pro tip here. Trigger quick surveys at key times. So you want to have behavioral triggers for your surveys if you're using the active side of things, right? And do that at abandonment, after purchase, after lead generation, that type of stuff. And use these types of questions. I'm not going to read through all of them. The slides will be up somewhere too, if you want, whatever. There's a bunch of them. These are all great things to do. Obviously, trigger them accordingly. Okay? Usability tests are also in the active testing domain. This is when you literally sit down and watch them use your site, or use like usertesting.com where you're not literally sitting with them. But yeah, so usability test pros, they're individual and detailed responses. And they're relatively easy to recruit, but then you have to be careful on how you recruit people, because if they're just going for monetary kind of reparations there, they're not quite going to be the best ones to use there. And then also you have to make sure that they're an actually kind of like within your customer avatar. Their cons, they're expensive. If you're using True Labs, PayPal does a lot of usability work, and they have an in-house lab that they do everything in, between both just usability testing, also the like neuro stuff and all that type of stuff. So that stuff gets expensive. Again, it's another small sample size if you're on a budget, and it's still just a fraction of your ideal customer, and then they're crazy time consuming. They take a lot of time, right? So text to use for that would be user testing or usability hub. I absolutely love usability hub. That's why they get a crown. They're fantastic. They have a bunch of different types of user tests to use, and I can show you some examples of that in a little bit. But let me just talk one more time. I'm going to really just need to drive this home about why I've made a distinction between active and passive testing. And the problems with active testing, here's kind of my main four. There's something called the Hawthorne effect. And that's really, this was found when a researcher was actually in a factory, and they were asking their employees questions. They were answering in a way that they thought would please the surveyor or the asker, right? So they're reporting on what you think they want, what they think you want to hear, not how they actually feel, right? So have you ever seen a survey that starts with this? Guess what? You're not anymore. Like at all. These words kill it. Act as you normally would in this scenario. No, it's too late. And that's where passive user testing comes in. Yeah, that's how I feel every time. Like, what's wrong with just me right now? But survey biases, this actually comes with how you're putting the questions together on the survey for, out of 1 to 10, how do you feel about this? There's gonna be a lot of variances that occur. Like, we've all seen these types of surveys. And unless you have a professional survey maker, like a professional surveyor, you're bound to screw this up, right? So these get really, really subjective, and it's it's a lot harder to quantify and to come up with a margin of error within there. Researcher's bias. So if this guy came up to you and said, I'm researching some stuff right now, how much do you love Star Wars? It's kind of a bias there, right? He really loves it. And then if the Hawthorne effect plays anything, you're like, that's okay. Even if you hate it. Like, it's okay. That's good. So the researcher who's doing this stuff is so close to the content. When they ask you a question, they create either loaded questions or questions you don't understand. And then pretty much what that turns into, it's kind of one of those self-fulfilling prophecies. They ask the question in such a way based off their expertise that they're going to get the answer they want. So that's not helping anybody, right? You're not going to create something that's good for a user if you have this type of researcher's bias. And finally, non-response bias. Here's your target market. It's all these people. These are the people answering your service or getting into active user tests. It's just that. Where's my arrow? There it is. It's just that one guy raising his hand right there. Only good stock photo I've ever used. Cool. So the biggest problem that I'm really trying to drive home here with active user tests is there's a huge difference between what you say and what you do. Okay? So that brings me into passive user tests. A passive user test is a user test where the user is now unaware they're in a testing environment. Okay? So it kind of sounds creepy. You're like, I'm just creeping on this guy or this person using my site. But this stuff is the best. This is where the gold is. You're not asking them to report on their actions. You're asking them to take an action. Actually, you're not even asking them a damn thing. They're on your site and they have to take the action. So the first thing that I consider a passive user test is a heat map. And what this is going to do is it's going to tell you where users are clicking on average and kind of break it down a little bit more. So here's an example of 2 heat maps. Do I have a laser? Yeah. This one is going through the actual clicks on the site. You can see what's awesome here is, hey, they're clicking on that form field. That's where we want them to go. We want them to click that thing, and we want them to fill in their information. They're doing it, then we've successfully designed this, we've idiot-proofed the site, essentially, right? What this one over here is doing is it is telling us the depth by which people are scrolling. So it's going to tell us, in a standard, sample size of, so you have 20,000 people you're looking at, you see around 50% of people are still hitting into some of your main offerings. Those right there are two of our core offerings that we sell on our site, and people are seeing them, which is good. It's exciting for us because they actually then click them, because there's people clicking down there. If you ran one of these and you got the dark blue, like right here, there's a problem, right? Your most compelling content, your stuff you want them to see, they're not. So this is an example of a passive user test because they're just actually using the site as they normally would. But you don't have to preface it with act as you normally would, right? So things you can learn from this, find out where they're clicking. There's some other reports within these types of technologies where you can find time to click. That one's a really cool figure where, say you have a main call to action on your page or you have an advertisement on that page that you want to track. You can find out how long it takes people to click the thing. That's a lot of power for you, right? That knowledge is very powerful, okay? And then more importantly, where they aren't clicking or where they aren't scrolling. If you're seeing that people aren't getting to your important stuff, then you need a design change. So here's an example. This is actually an older version of our website before we kind of changed things up. So this is an older example, but what we saw is I had a heat map on this page, and see right here where I zoomed in? They're clicking that was all just one big image. Stupid, I know. It was just all one big image, and there was a lot of people clicking that thing, thinking that they were going to see that information. Instead of clicking the whole image, they're actually clicking the buttons on there, right? But it wasn't linked to anything. So we saw an opportunity here. What we did is we were like, oh, well, let's go link it to our sales page. And go figure, we saw 40.9% increase in sales. Because, they showed intent, we weren't delivering on it, we then deliver on it, guess what? You win, right? We didn't have to split test that. Because that is a clear functional issue. Because they're showing intent as they normally use the site. Here's another one. This one stunk. This is recent. This is we launched our training courses called DigitalMarketer HQ, and we have been spending a lot of money on building customer stories. So people who go through our courses use it for their marketing teams and those things. We fly a producer and people out there to do very professional interviews and build out these great customer stories. This is a very long page, I know, but see this? That's the content right there. That's the stuff we're paying 3 salaried employees to fly around the country to produce. 6% of people are seeing them. Bummer. Right? That is some very compelling content. We need to move further up. We know that we need to get that at a higher place because we know that when people see these things, they are more likely to purchase. All right? So this is just telling us a pure design flaw based on interactions on the site, again, without people having to report it to us. It's passive. Another type, session recording. So this goes into kind of like the peak recordings and those types of things. So this is, you're seeing at an individual level what your customers are actually doing. Did I make this does that move? Oh, yeah. I'm proud of myself for that. So what these do is you literally see how people are using your site individually, an individual session, and you're going to start seeing some things where they literally take their mouse and just like, screw this! They can't find what they're looking for. What's that?
What is this called?
The session recordings? What?
Is this called session recording?
Yeah, so these are session recordings. You'll find them within, there's companies like True Conversion, Hotjar, Lucky Orange, usertesting.com should have this. They're all around there. Find the one that works for you, because guess what? They're all pretty much the same. Okay, there are some differences between some of them, but a lot of them, this is using True Conversion right here. But it's just going to tell you where points of frustration are, if they're getting to where they need to, how they're going through the site, right? These are powerful. There's a lot of power to these, but there's also a major bummer, and I'll get into that in a second. But this is actually one of the things. We had this was one of our old cart. No, this is an example, a mock-up of a new cart. But what we found was I had to sit down and watch 1,000 session recordings, and that takes a while. Granted, you can put them on 2x, 4x, skip pauses, those types of things. But dang, that's like 8 hours of work, because then you're looking for trends, you get a little tired, those types of things. And it's a bummer, but it really helps. Session recordings are great and everything, but they are very, very time consuming. One of the things I'd recommend if you get into session recordings, you're gonna have to put the work on like a single person. Subjectivity, like there's a subjective factor to these recordings, and then if you slice it out, you can run into some issues. My strategy is I try to build into segments, so I try to do recordings based off of individual behaviors. So say for instance, I only want recordings of people that clicked X button. Those are the recordings I'm gonna go through, so that cuts down on all the filler that you generally have to go through when you're just kind of like knocking things out. I think he's going to have you use the microphone this time. I haven't been repeating the questions good enough.
I totally am really fascinated with everything, but we don't have, we have a budget to do a lot of this, but here's just as a new person looking in on this, is it not an efficient strategy to find a competitor that you know has the money to do all this and does all this, and use their structure and layout as a good rough draft before you implement it, rather than have a baseline that's so far off, but if you know that something works, the layout, the wording, and all those kinds of things.
If you asked me that like 5 years ago, I would have been like, no. But things have changed, especially in how I approach things. Specifically, I really believe that the concept of best practices is like an optimizer and a split tester. Saying best practices is like the dirtiest of dirty words. But there is a reason we have templates. There is a reason we have these best practices, because what they are expectations. You're meeting user expectations by having a baseline. Will it work for your specific audience? You don't know that yet, but you at least have somewhere to start. That's where templates come in. So what I do, I would use something like that to start with, but then monitor. Like these things, like this type of software isn't that expensive actually. So it's not going to break the bank. But with this type of things, then you have personnel work that's going to come in. But heat maps and those types of things, that stuff could be enough for you to see if you're getting the actual user interactions that you're looking for. Okay? So in this example, what I saw over those 1,000 recordings was everybody was scrolling down a lot first. Like the first action, instead of starting to fill in their information, they scrolled down first. And that was because we neglected to say the name or the price of the product until the bottom of the page, right next to the button. Ugh. Okay, that was kind of a duh, but as soon as we figured that out, we came up with new designs. This was an ugly, ugly mock-up I made, and the head designer make better. That really improved our conversion rate right there, because we were starting to meet the expectations of the people of how they interacted with the site, right? Another example would be, sorry, that's rude, checking the time, a few minutes. There's form analytics. Which fields are actually problematic for you? So what these will tell you, like, it's not just a matter of did they fill out the form, it's how did they fill out the form? To what degree were they able to get through it quickly? How long did it take them to fill the form out? How many times did they have to refill a field? Where's the drop-off rate for particular fields? This type of stuff is going to tell you how they're interacting with this thing, rather than just saying conversion rate. Have you ever been in a room talking to people and they're just like, oh, like I hate that question? We had one where we asked people if they, like, I think it was, what status of is your marketing team like? And we used really odd language, and people had a real hard time with that. And it was just a click down and choose an option. People spent an average of 40 seconds on that thing. Might as well have just said, get the hell off the page, right? So what that showed us was we still needed that for a qualifying factor, but we needed to work on the language, because how we were using it wasn't resonating with people. So that was a good way to do it. So instead of us getting to just a bickering kind of argument about should we have this field, should it be said like this, we just let the users tell us based on how they interacted with the site. Then there's funnel visualization. Anything can really do this. Google Analytics can do this, but it's gonna tell you where the holes, where the drop-off is on your site, right? And this is a great way to start. If you have an idea of what your drop-off rate on your funnel is, you know where to start looking into like putting heat maps on a particular page, putting recordings on another one, right? Because you're gonna see like, oh man, like if only we got X% more people to this second step, we should, and assume that this conversion rate stays static, we're gonna see a much higher take rate, right? So then when you identify the problem areas, that's when you start actually doing the real work. You shouldn't just be like, screw it, I'm gonna put heat maps and recordings on every page, because you're gonna learn nothing. That is, you're burying yourself in data, and that's a terrible idea. but knowing where your drop-off points are, that's a great one. I did this just recently for some of our lead generation landing pages, and I have a whole strategy for that I'd love to nerd out with people about later. Finally, there's 2 more cases, and this doesn't require software at all. There's 2 more things that I think that count as passive user testing data that are outside of all the fancy technologies, all the fancy SaaSes that are out there right now. And the first one is simple: customer service questions. We have a weekly meeting every Wednesday, and we start it with a customer success, and we end it with the top 5 questions with an actual full customer story that we learned that week. We ask, what are the top 5 issues in customer service you're seeing over the last week? And they talk about change week over week, and then what they're seeing there. This is gonna be huge for you, because this is a case when they are in their normal mode. Like a lot of the cases, they might be pissed off. And guess what? That's when you wanna, you don't wanna be like, well, could you tell us why you're angry? No, just let them tell you. They'll tell you already. And you'll know based off of those results where you need to start working on things. We realized we had a login issue with one of our premium products. There were some very unhappy people there, and that persisted throughout because we had to update the site, but if people didn't clear their caches, then guess what? So what we did was on the banner said, hey, we had a recent update. If you're having login errors, clear your cache. Click here to learn how to do this. We never got that questioned again in customer service. So it's meeting them where they need to be met. All web design, conversion rate optimization, all digital marketing is meeting the expectations of the visitor and the user. And I think passive testing can do that in the best way possible. Here's the top customer service questions you can use when they're on the call, or the top 3 questions you get from potential customers. So you can just ask your customer service this stuff if you don't want to do the standard 5, if you don't have a regular meeting like that. And then the other one is just, oh yeah, so that was I forgot I had that slide, sorry. The other one is sales questions. And then this will be what will convince your customers to buy. Same as with customer service, ask your sales team, what are the top questions you get from your potential customers? How can we get this on the site? How can we get this to them easier? Because the idea is you need to anticipate what they want. And the only way you can do that is with this type of research. So that is why I love passive user tests. They're an example of what your customer actually does versus what they say. The only limitation is your traffic, and identifies structural issues that can bypass split testing test periods because you've identified an accessibility or a foundational issue. So that is my presentation for you today. I hope I was able to convince you that passive user testing is pretty badass. Active user testing, while good still, needs to be combined with it. And that's my content. Those are my contact deets. I work from a remote office, so I get lonely often, so email often and we'll chat. All right, thank you. If there's any questions, do your thing. Oh, before you do questions, if you guys have those sheets, could you fill those out? The rating sheets? Unless you didn't like me, then leave them blank. Survey bias. Okay, any questions? Come on. Yeah, we got one. Perfect. Microphone is key.
We've got. Yeah. Okay. Yep. We have the thing where they record the sessions. What's that? What's the one? Lucky Orange.
Okay. Yep.
And it's just the most fascinating thing ever. We have it set when someone comes on, it's like a doorbell sound or something. Like that.
I found that kind of annoying. And then when they leave, door closed.
Yeah, it's super obnoxious, but it's interesting. And we learned so many really cool things about you just have to forget all of your bias completely. It's really humbling, actually.
Yeah.
To actually watch what people do to your site. Anyway, my question is this. If we're going to do A/B testing, we have a new site. Mm-hmm. We've got all kinds of history and all sorts of, baggage with all our old sites like everyone does. We just started a brand new site. If you had a brand new sparkling site, you just pulled the cover off of it, and you want to scale it up, it's not a churn and burn, it's something you really want to spend the next 5-10 years building.
Yep.
What would be the formula you would suggest? Like do not necessarily the formula, but like what services or what should we set up? I mean, we're doing analytics, we got everything set up, we're gonna,
Okay.
what would you do?
So first thing I'd do, and we actually, it's kind of, I'll admit this here. When we do a site launch, we don't run a split test on our site launches or updates there, mainly because there's so many like outside things with like novelty effects and other things that could occur that's going to create a bias in there. And fact of the matter is we were going to make the change anyways, so why am I going to try to fight it? What I do is when you have that launch is I would end up probably setting up these types of things. So I'd have my analytics set up, and I would set up this type of user data, passive user testing, and then evaluate what's going on. Because what you're going to see from the analytics is that's going to be the what's happening. Like you'll get this kind of the status, and then this stuff's going to tell you why, right? You don't get into split testing until you have a why factor. That then you can go say, well, what about this then?
I'm talking more about just collection of data. It's just, getting set on the right foot. Because I know the launch, the first while it's going to
Yeah. No, as long as you have your analytics set up in something like this on the site, so you're using Lucky Orange, that's good. Have that set up. And Lucky Orange is interesting in compared to like the other tools out there because they are always recording things and they put the onus on you to kind of tag and filter and all that stuff, which can be kind of a bummer, but you're always getting that information. I'm out of time. You and I can just talk after. I got the sheet that was like, you're out of time, buddy. Cool. All right. Thank you guys so much. Fill out the sheet for me too, only if you liked me.